sync word penguin in 3, 2, 1. Penguin. Yay.
Woo.
Greetings. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to a series that I'm totally not neglecting. Welcome back to SpinoCast. I'm joined by my friends Eric and Gibson, and today we're going to be talking Prehistoric Planet Season 2, aka The Best Thing Ever, Part 2. Say hello, guys.
Hello, the BBC John Favreau dinosaur.
Yeah. So, indeed. So, why don't we jump right into it, because I have a feeling like there's going to be a lot that has to be said, and I don't want this to be like 5 hours long.
Oh, yeah, because we can make it 5 hours, easy.
We could indeed. So we're going to go through episode by episode and just talk about any standout parts and anything and what our overall thoughts were, and they do a little summary at the end. Starting off with islands. Really solid opening to the series, and I remember one thing we commented on initially was the Zalmoxi scene at the beginning. I thought was just such a fun and really chill little way of easing into the theme of the episode, which is something that the show struggles with sometimes, is keeping with the consistent theme, which we'll talk about later with swamps. But
yeah, I really like the opening. I need to turn my gain further downwards because I'm just peaking so much. I really like how, this episode somewhat boldly doesn't even start on an island, but then you get to actually see a little bit of the process of like how castaways get thrown out to sea and potentially, end up on islands where their species isn't even native. And I thought that was cool. It took me a little bit to kind of realize what they were doing, and then I was like, oh, that's neat.
Yeah.
It's a good idea to start islands off that way,
Exactly. And, immediately... Was it immediately? No, immediately after we got the Simosuchus scene, which Simosuchus is immediately another beloved thing
in
the community.
That was great.
My profile
really
picture happens to be the man himself right now.
Yes.
By complete coincidence.
Of course.
Yeah, so... I loved the way that they animated the Simosuchus. I think they did a really good job of making them very reptilian-like. Just like there were a lot of shots where they were just kind of sitting, just hanging about, where they really were like iguanas and stuff. I think they did a really good job with their animation.
Totally.
And not making them, because even though they are very, they look a lot like a small mammal. They're not small mammals, and I think they did a good job of portraying them probably how they would look.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Actually. I also loved the honey badger energy they evoked with with him kicking at the Majungasaurus and stuff.
Oh yes.
Which funny enough, I've seen some people complaining about that, and they're like, "Why didn't the Majungasaurus just grab it?" And I'm like, "Well, obviously you've never seen a honey badger
have you
ever
seen an animal?"
Yeah.
That's
it's
a
one of those
totally
things
believable
where it's
animal moment.
There are a lot of moments where animals will do things that, like, by our human standards, we don't think make a ton of sense, right? But like when you watch predators interacting with any kind of prey item, right? It's pretty consistent that if the prey animal fights back at all, they're often they don't know what to do, right?
Yep.
Sometimes they know what to do, but there's a lot of times where they just won't. And even if eventually, right, the Majungasaurus would have eventually been like, screw it, I'm just gonna go for it. At first they're like, oh, okay, this guy's fighting back. I'm not too sure about this, right? I've seen like you said, similar things happen with honey badgers and all those carnivores. Same thing with, I'm sure, some other small animals. I'm just not thinking of the scenes right now, but yeah, it can be pretty consistent that when something fights back at all, the carnivores can freak out for a second, because oftentimes, right, there's a reason why carnivores will often chase things instinctually that are running away, Because if something's trying to get away from you, that's way easier for them to actually kill than something that's fighting back. Because something that's fighting back could potentially injure them, right? And they don't want to get injured because an injury can be really bad for them. So
well, one thing I just thought of is
they'll often hesitate.
Yeah, well, one thing I just thought of is what they say to hikers if you come across a bear is not to run, but to make yourself look bigger and make a lot of noise. Because
totally. For
why
the same
is
reason
Simosuchus able to intimidate this big theropod? Now, excuse me while I use this bear horn.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Totally.
Now, I just realized, because I'm hovering over the episode on Apple TV now just to refresh myself, and I messed up on the order of things. I almost skipped over the Hatzegopteryx hunting scene.
You fool!
Which, that was an awesome surprise to have, is seeing Asdarchids hunting things like I've always wanted to see.
Pretty
Anyways.
great
Oh,
scene.
yeah, that was first, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
That
And
was.
It was I love the environment of this scene with like the really short little like conifers and just the Tetrahedros sort of being barely visible as they would rear up and stuff. It was a perfect habitat for this scene to take place in.
Oh, yeah.
And then the pterosaurs get there and they just look fantastic. The way they just land and don't even pause. They like land into a gallop and immediately like start killing things, and it made me realize how
they ambush
subdued.
from the sky.
Yeah, literally ambush from the sky. It made me realize how subdued a lot of the scenes with the Asdarchids were last season, because I felt very satisfied from last season of all the Asdarchid action we got, and then immediately with this scene I was like, oh yeah, we never really saw them have a like full-on big hunting scene, and it was really cool to see them just wreaking havoc. There's that
this
shot
scene was
where,
awesome.
like,
This is one of the best scenes in the whole show. Like this was awesome.
Yeah. There's that one shot from like inside the trees where they're backlit and they have to, halt right before they get to trees because they can't fit. They look so real. That's one of those just like right on the nuggets shots with lighting and compositing and stuff that just looks really good.
You know what helped
sound
it a lot
design's
for me?
incredible. I love the low like drumming and honks that they make. It's really neat.
You know, it's another thing that made this scene more realistic for me, which you kind of touched on already, was the environment. Because, I mean, living in the Northeast myself in the United States, there's a lot of small needly trees like this and stuff next to the forests, and it felt really like a really familiar environment for me, and it almost made it more terrifying because how realistic they looked just in this very kind of chill, not very dramatic setting with these other animals was really cool.
Totally. And the music in this scene was on point, man. The music was great.
Music was good.
Yeah.
And then we, of course, get those shots from the POV of the babies hiding in the bushes of the one just towering over them, which are probably some of the best shots in the show at conveying how big Asdarchids were, besides just seeing them next to T-Rex in North America.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah,
that's another...
These guys were really big.
Yeah, they were huge. I loved to... just one more thought before we move on. They had an interesting mix of male and female individuals that were fighting over the babies as well. It felt like just a kind of a realistic conglomerate of just animals that weren't hunting in an organized pack, but were just in a group for more efficiency in a way.
They always do a good job with like believable group variation. There's very few times, I could think of a couple, but there's very few times where the groups look like weirdly homogenous in this show. Normally there's some nice subtlety, especially if they have sexual dimorphism going on, which helps a lot.
This scene reminded me a lot of ground hornbills, which do a similar behavior, right? Where like several individuals will group up and they'll basically kind of almost walk, I mean not in a line, but almost in a line, right? And basically their goal is to flush up any prey. And oftentimes like one will flush up prey and then the different one will go and grab it, kind of a thing.
That's cool.
And
That's
I'm just
really
like,
cool.
that seems they're basically doing that.
Yep.
They're
That's
walking
really,
across
really
the
neat.
clearing and trying to get anything to jump up.
And I think that's perfect too, because the Hatzegopteryx design really evokes a hornbill.
It does, and even the sound design to some extent.
Yeah.
The final thing I have to say about this scene, I don't want us to talk about this scene the whole episode of the podcast, but the final thing I have to say is that, and maybe this is just a factor of like what happens when you recreate a similar ecosystem and just happens to be the same genus and stuff, but I couldn't help but think of Planet Dinosaur during this scene because like the low plants, of course we have Tethys hatters here instead of a small sauropod, but the small herbivores and then the Hatzegopteryx just like wreaking havoc in this big group. It low-key felt like Prehistoric Planet. Like, it's similar enough that it might not have been intentional, but it almost feels like Prehistoric Planet was trying to say, hey, do you remember this relatively memorable scene from this show that hasn't aged super gracefully? We're gonna do it way better.
Yeah.
Yeah. No kidding. And I just thought of one more thought as well about the scene from the perspective. I know I talked to you, Gibson, from this perspective of a lifelong Jurassic Park fan. One of my biggest wishes was to have an Asdarkid hunting scene, like people and with people like in an undergrowth like this. Instead, we got one that's the size of Mount Everest wrecking a plane. But
well, how can you complain about that? The realism is off the charts.
How can you complain?
I get it. Okay.
Just enjoy product and get excited for next product.
Exactly.
Yes. But just, I know we already mentioned these scenes, but just the shots from the Tethys hadros POV of being in the vegetation and looking upwards at these things towering over the trees above them. I'm like, okay, that's all I wanted. I don't need this anymore. Thank you, Prehistoric Planet.
Yeah.
That's so scary.
It did a very good job. Like, upon rewatch, because I rewatched all the episodes like a couple days ago, and I had the specific thought during that Hatzegopteryx hunt scene. I was like, normally the way these scenes are filmed, I feel like the film crew, could realistically be filming them and not be in grave danger. But this is one where I kind of feel like they might have lost a cameraman that day.
I was imagining that it was a pre-set up camera, probably. Because I know that
that would make
they'll
sense.
do stuff like that and be like, hey, this is a clearing where they often hunt. Well, set up this camera and hope for the best because in Planet stuff, that's how they get a lot of their shots.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the most efficient way of filming, which is why it takes Planet Earth like several years to come up with its second season.
They can't produce seasons quite this fast.
No, they can't. But they play it in the long game, and so I thought it was something that is definitely still very achievable.
Yeah.
Anyhow, Madagascar, centerpiece of the episode. Simosuchus, dope.
Adalatherium.
I love the reconstruction. The Majungasaurus, I want to point out, I love the way the Majungasaurus is animated. It looks suitably awkward, but still believable.
Yes.
There's a really great waddle to it because it's just such a fat, wide, weird creature.
I love how we got more Abelisaurs this season. That's something I was really hoping for because I really felt like we got lots of Tyrannosaurs, but we didn't really get to see what the southern hemisphere's main carnivores at this time frame was. Other than Carnotaurus, so I'm really happy that we got two more Abelisaurs.
Agreed.
And the Majungasaurus, of course, is great.
And like I was saying prior to the show too, I think we have a perfect palette of Abelisaurs represented in the overall show. We'll get to Rajasaurus when we talk about Badlands, obviously, but I think Carnotaurus, you need Carnotaurus. It's the big one. Majungasaurus is just such a disproportionate freak and is also very popular.
Sausage.
And then for your third option, you just kind of need to pick any other Abelisaur because all the rest of them kind of represent the rest of the group very well.
Yeah.
So I think Rajasaurus was a good choice just for its environment
works.
alone. And
I think Rajasaurus really cool. was a pretty big one too.
It
I
was,
could be wrong.
yeah.
It was.
Yeah.
It was on
which
the larger
makes
side.
it all the cooler that they portrayed it as so agile, but we'll get to that.
We'll get to that. Anyways,
yeah,
Adalatherium is next on our list here.
I was just gonna say, I love how the Majungasaurus has the blind eye too. They do this a lot in this show where they'll really scar up the creatures in a way that makes them feel just so much more real. Every beak and toenail has caked dirt on it, and it just it really adds, and I like it.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Totally.
Adalatherium, admittedly, the Adalatherium scene is probably one of the more boring scenes of the season, but I am
except for
glad we
one
got a
part.
scene with a... except for one part, yeah.
Yeah, that one
but I
part
am
was
just really
hype.
glad, in
Sliver.io.
principle, that we got a mammal scene. Like, I think that's cool.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where, like, I'm like, admittedly, this is kind of boring to me. I think this scene's only okay, but I'm glad it exists because, you know, it does help to complete the picture of the late Cretaceous a little more to have that somewhere in there.
I was watching the Skeleton Crew, which is a channel that I know me and David at least watch, their review of this episode, and I know that they said at some point that it might actually be, it's a bit more up in the air. I won't go into the full thing now, but there's reason to think that Adalatherium might be on the, like, closer to placentals than they are to monotremes, right? And so because of that, it might have been in a position where it had evolved live birth. But, like, that certainly is not certain. That's kind of more of like a, that may be the case. But I just thought I'd point it out right now. But still, it's really cool to show a mammal laying eggs, right? Because it's very
live
unique
birth
is
compared
one of
to
the
what we're
last,
familiar with.
Yeah, it's one of the last mammal-y traits to really evolve. I mean, heck, there's still 2 mammals
It's still around
that
today.
still lay 'em. Yeah,
It is.
So it was pretty cool to. It was really cool to see that.
Totally.
And
And
then,
of course, the highlight was the Madtsoia, I think it was.
Yeah, the
snake.
Madtsoia just yoinking that Machikosaurus.
Yes, no,
It
that
was
was awesome.
just gone.
I love how we were all thinking like it was going to be the Majungasaurus that came in and got it, and then just like it just gets annihilated by this snake, and that was so.
This snake that
was
is
so
like
awesome.
in
I
the
love the
previous
setup,
shot
too.
I saw on rewatch. Like the snake is there for a while. You just
I
don't
love
notice it.
The setup too earlier on with just the 2 shots of the close-ups of the snake too, which you thought was just like
Random
B-roll
B-roll?
footage of
That's
like
what I thought.
potential danger.
I thought
and
it was a real snake. I thought it was like a little snake too. It was not clear that it was something like Madtsoia, and then I was like, oh,
25-foot
when
snake.
you said snake, you meant business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Couple
And,
Madtsoia comments as well. Again, I learned from the Skeleton Crew. Got to give them credit where credit is due. But so there's one thing they were pointing out that like it still could be possible, but like it's hard to really say, is it could be possible that Madtsoia might not have been able to take an animal that big, because they display it very python-like here, right? But Madtsoia is part of a group called the Madtsoids, and they're a very primitive group of snakes that actually apparently lasted like a long time. Like I think they went extinct in the Pleistocene.
Oh wow.
Which is pretty darn recent. But because they're so primitive, they actually have much more lizard-like skulls than many snakes. Like probably internally wise, like probably the head still probably looks pretty snaky to us. But so they didn't actually have, based on a few in the group that we actually have skulls of, they didn't have the same jaw mobility that many modern snakes do, like pythons. Like they still had a lot of jaw mobility, but not as much. So it might not have been able to eat something quite that much bigger than it. But again, that's a little up in the air.
Makes sense for a primitive snake. Because I do feel like Madtsoia and its relatives in paleo art are almost always depicted as just like alternate universe Burmese python. But it makes sense that that's not entirely accurate. I will say
even
though,
Titanoboa, with all the research that went into it, is always just given here's generic python.
It's always just an anaconda. It's literally green anaconda in every piece of paleo art. No one even tries.
Well, hey, at least it's a boa.
True. They could pick a worse snake. At least it's not like a yellow eyelash viper.
Yeah,
the size of a truck.
Exactly. It could always be worse, Gibson. It could always be worse.
I just have to point out as a compliment to the Madtsoia taking out the Machikosaurus, best snake strike and coil animation I've ever seen. As a snake lover and owner, these animals just constantly get butchered by animators. I'm sorry. Like, they just never look believable. And, I could tell this was a CGI snake. It's not like it fully tricked my brain, but best I've seen, by far. And that really, really pleased me.
100%.
I remember
Especially
when I
the
first saw the
strike,
scene,
right? Where it's so fast. Because that's one thing I remember noting.
Yes.
Because I've been to Gibson's house and I've helped feed his snakes. And that's one thing that I was always just like, I was really taken off guard by, is how fast they strike, right? I mean, obviously they're a lot smaller, but they can like literally blink and you miss it. And so the speed that they had the snake strike in the show was very good to see. Very nice to see.
Yeah. I remember when I first saw the scene, part of me was questioning if they just used a real snake as a prop and just superimposed a Mashikasaurus in the place of like a prey animal or something.
Yeah.
Because it looked really good.
It does look really good. As someone who has snakes, I could definitely tell it wasn't real. But I mean, again, like, best attempt I've ever seen.
Very nice.
Anyways, next scene we have takes away from the tropical settings of the rest of the episode.
Well, this is my favorite of the episode.
The fragmentary boys.
This one had me so hyped.
Known from a leg and some toes.
Exactly. But they have such a cool name that sadly I think David Attenborough might not pronounce totally correctly based on the spelling. But he says, what does he say?
I don't know what he says.
Improbator,
okay.
but it's Imperabator. That's the way it's spelled. But
yeah.
Who knows?
I don't think he got it right, but I appreciate that he made it sound real Attenborough-y.
Yes.
Which is all we can really ask for in this life.
This was one of my most hyped scenes from the show when I first saw the trailers and when it was spoiled for me initially. And it was also accented with the opening with the thermal cameras was such a cool idea.
Oh yeah, that was cool. That was neat.
Highlighting how they're warm-blooded. Certainly that far down the line, they were almost certainly warm-blooded.
You
down the line to birds.
And one thing I don't think a lot of people know is the fact that, well, first of all, Imperabator is a Paravian. It's not a Dromaeosaur, hence why it doesn't have the sickle claw on its foot.
And we do know it didn't have the sickle claw, because that part is
that's
preserved.
the one part.
That's the one part we have.
Yeah.
But
the only thing we know they got right.
Yes. But one thing that's also really cool, might not be immediately obvious to people, but I think it was just based on how they animated them, is these things were thought to be basically Utah raptor sized. And even though there's not a great there's not something great for comparison to really convey that in the episode, I think they do a really good job animating them, especially on the ice. They look kind of big and awkward and in comparison to the Morosaurus and everything.
I think I'm a sucker for the snow effects in this show, because, like, the reason this is my favorite scene of the episode is, I mean, it's just a really cool hunt scene. It has one of my favorite songs from the season. I've been listening to it on repeat.
It's a banger.
But my favorite aspect of it is just seeing the Morosaurus and the Imperabators just jumping through snow and landing in these snow drifts and then skidding out on the ice. Just like the way they interact with the environment in this scene looks so convincing, and it's just so cool. Like the first big jump that the Morosaurus did into like a snow drift got me so excited. I was like, that just looks so believable
They did
and so cool.
some good animals stumbling in the snow as they try to run through it.
I loved how most of the chase was filmed via drone shot as well.
Yes, dude, I love me a drone shot. I love drone shots in documentaries. Yeah, what I'm hoping for one day that we have, Prehistoric Planet hasn't quite committed to yet, but I really want a primarily drone shot chase scene, right? That's like a really long take of just like two things just like running for a while.
A drone shot long take would be really cool.
Because in like other Planet Earth, Frozen Planet, that type stuff, they have some really cool hunting scenes that are just drone shot long takes.
Ooh, it's thundering.
That I'd really like to see. Oh, is it now?
Yeah.
Watch out over there if hopefully the storm doesn't get you.
But just to clarify real quick, just so everyone knows what these, because I know I mentioned it before, Morosaurus is known from a leg, and then Imperabator is just the toes. Because I think the way I said it before made it sound like it was Imperabator was known from toes and a leg, which is not the case.
No leg. Don't lie to the people. Don't get their hopes up.
I don't want to do that.
Yep. I think it's funny because Imperabator, I think just for its name alone and its presentation in the show, has become a fan favorite in the community. And everyone's like, oh, this animal's so cool. And I'm like, well, I like to make a distinction that I love prehistoric planets in Peribator, but we really know nothing.
No. There's even a chance, like, people think it might be a Paravian, but it could be a ceratosaur for all we know. Like, it could be that they depicted it not even that realistically.
It could just be like an Abelisaur or something.
Yeah.
Well, I love Gabriel Aguedo made a post on Instagram like a while ago, I think, showing off some of the designs he helped with, and he mentioned in the description, like, he was talking about, you know, a little bit of behind the scenes on each reconstruction, and he mentioned Imperator, and I think the only thing he said about it was, this one was a real challenge, and I'm like, I wonder why.
Imagine making a whole animal from just a toe. And they and they look at it and they're like, well, this isn't a dromaeosaur. What do we do?
Yeah. Because at least with Nanoxaurus, right? Because Nanoxaurus is known from, you know, only a couple skull fragments, but at least we know it's a Tyrannosaur, right? And a derived Tyrannosaur. Yeah. So you have something to work with there. But
you have a basis there, whereas Imperator is just like, you have very little material and very little certainty what it even is.
Yeah.
But it's cool that they tackled it. And it's cool. I want to point out, too, just that it's neat that there's a snowy scene in the Islands episode, because I think, like most people, I admit that when I hear the word island, I imagine, like, a circle of sand with a palm tree first.
Oh, same.
And so the fact that they went for, you know, an Antarctic island in winter, just very different from what I expected for the episode. I thought it kept it feeling very diverse, which I liked.
Totally.
Yes, indeed.
Anyway, scooting along to our last scene here in the episode, just to keep things moving.
The last scene? Okay.
This is the last scene, the Hatzegopteryx courtship scene.
Yes,
I
this
adore
was great.
the design. Yeah, I adore the male with the in-season
breeding
colors.
Yes.
Breeding colors. I think.
Oh yeah, the
looks
colors.
Really cool.
Like the Hatzegopteryx design was already one of my favorites from the show, but the breeding male colors are just beautiful.
Yes.
He looks awesome. And so the actual courtship display was so much more complicated than even the trailers led us to believe, which I liked because you are the Birdman, Eric, and you know more than anyone here that birds have incredibly complex courtship displays sometimes.
Yes.
And it was really cool to see that, or something like that.
And though, of course,
with
these
such
guys
big
aren't
animals.
And though, of course, these guys aren't birds or even dinosaurs. I mean, pterosaurs are closely related to dinosaurs and stuff, and you know, with their giant display crests and stuff, I mean, it's very probable that they also did display things like this, since birds do similar, which also have very large display crests and feathers and stuff.
I got very excited when he just picked up the first branch, because I was like, oh, he's gathering little gifts. I love seeing stuff like that with prehistoric animals, and the little like bill clicking that they did and stuff. Lots of neat little stuff. I love the setting for this scene too. It was really pretty.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Oh yeah,
and it matched the animals in a way that was
very
neat.
It reminds me of? The setting for the scene reminds me of every time Nigel Marvin is on a beach in a BBC documentary.
Here we see Parasaur. I will communicate with the Parasaurolophus.
Or in Chased by Sea Monsters, the what was it, the Arsinotherium?
Oh
scene?
yes.
Yeah. It totally gave me Nigel Marvin vibes.
Yeah, that was great. And then
we had really cool, like, cozy send-off to the episode.
It was really good. And we had Mr. Steal Your Girl come in, but then he wasn't there very long.
No, he didn't try very hard.
He got owned.
I love just how quickly it's just like, disaster, the female has left. 2 seconds later, she's back.
Yeah. Which I thought was good and very realistic, because like, again, like with like animal behaviors and stuff, sometimes stuff will happen, like with birds or displaying, where like a rival male will show up and then he has to fight her, and the female will be like, oh, there's a fight happening, I'm getting the heck out of here, right? But then they just come back afterwards, right? So, you know, I thought that was another nice little realistic touch.
I like to. I didn't even realize on rewatch. I noticed that you do actually see the female take off into the right side of the frame, which I completely missed the first time because I was too busy looking at the males fighting.
I didn't see that either.
But
I didn't see that either. Actually, I watched it twice now.
Yeah, you see her take off, which is a nice detail.
That's cool. The little stuff like that you just even some stuff that I probably haven't even noticed in season 1 how many times I've watched that, but just the fact they go to those lengths to
which is very nice,
detail-oriented show.
I know Prehistoric Planet can occasionally like suffer a little bit with like I know that in season 1 the Tarbosaurus laying down scene, if you actually pay attention you'll notice that they're often in different spots. So I know that they can struggle a little bit with that, so it's very nice to see them doing nice little consistency stuff like that.
I feel like they're putting more work into like continuity this season. Not that they didn't put a lot of work into it last season, because they did, but there were those occasional scenes. I'm sure there's still some times where it's not perfect this season, but I felt like there was even more attention to detail with that type of stuff.
And that's actually something I want to bring up very briefly, because I have seen some people bring up a critique of the show that Walking with Dinosaurs did narrative stuff better than this show, which I agree. But I think the reason why this show appeals to me more is it makes the animals feel more realistic in a sense that we're only seeing brief snippets of their lives.
Can I rant about this for a second? Do I have a minor rant license for this?
Oh, go for it. I was actually just going to say, I was actually just going to say before you start, seeing as how we're already 35 minutes and just with episode 1, I think what I'm going to do is once we get through Badlands, I'm going to cut and we're going to do part 1, and then we're going to try to get through the last 3 in part 2.
All right, cool. Sure. That works, because I need to actually get new batteries for my microphone anyways. So
Okay.
That works.
Anyhow, I'll try to keep this short, but I have to rant about the Walking with Dinosaurs comparisons and critiques a little bit, because I love Walking with Dinosaurs. It's probably still my favorite dinosaur documentary over Prehistoric Planet, just because of like nostalgia reasons. It means so much to me. You know, it was my whole childhood was watching that show on repeat. But I while I understand the critique, and I don't think it's like an invalid criticism, I just feel like I see it too often, and the two shows are just so different, and they have fundamentally different goals. They're trying to do different things. Like, I feel like people are not fully understanding that Prehistoric Planet is Planet Earth with dinosaurs, or maybe a lot of these people haven't watched the newer Planet Earth or Blue Planet 2, and they're not as familiar with that format, because, like, for what this show is going for, it's nailing it. And I understand the critique. Again, I don't want to invalidate the critique that, like, is sometimes it feels a little scattered or a little all over the place, because I understand how you would feel that way. But I think it's sort of a critique of wishing the show was something that it's not. And I'm fine with them really bringing a little more of the... Yeah, that it's not trying to be. And I'm fine with the show trying a little more to do that, because like both Islands and Badlands are actually episodes that have some more like returning animals, returning locations, and I know people have talked about how they have kind of a better flow to them than some season 1 episodes, and so I can see that. So I'm cool with it, but honestly, I don't want the show to go too far in that direction, because to be honest, my instinct with this type of stuff is that the more story you have in an episode, the less real it feels to me.
Yeah.
100%.
Now, I think Walking with Dinosaurs balanced this really well, so I'm not saying that that you can't balance it. I'm not saying that that can't be done, but I think you do, you risk potentially decreasing the sense of immersion or realism when you try to add more story in. It can be balanced well, but you run that risk. And so I'm fine with Prehistoric Planet, and I even hope that Prehistoric Planet sticks to its format for the most part.
Yeah,
because I really like it.
Too.
And I really like the benefit that, like David says, it makes them feel very realistic, because we're seeing these short snippets, and also, and this is the final thing I'll say, and then I'll let you guys get a word in edgewise. The final thing I'll say is that I really like how big it makes the world feel. That's one thing I love about Prehistoric Planet's format, is because we see so many environments and so many animals, maybe sometimes it feels a little all over the place or not as focused as something like Walk with Dinosaurs, and that's an understandable criticism, but I think the positive side of that is that it shows so much of the world, and it really makes it feel as big as ours, and I think it helps with that sense of immersion.
Which is very good, because
I think it earns the title Prehistoric Planet.
Yeah. And also, like, you know, animals, as we know from modern animals, there's no reason to not think this was the case for a lot of prehistoric ones, right? Modern animals can often have very big ranges where you can find that species, right? I mean, look at North America, right? White-tailed deer are everywhere. Mule deer are like only in the west, but still they're like, that's a big area that they're in. Caribou are like in all of the north. They're even in, you know, Asia and stuff. I mean, like, animals live in a lot of different environments. And the same species can be present in a very wide area. But one thing I also want to say, just add on to that, like, it does also pretend a little bit on preference. I get that a lot of people prefer a little bit more narrative to their thing. And I can understand why that is.
I think naturally humans just seek that in media.
Yeah,
I mean, we love stories.
But I, at the very least, like you said, Gibson, I much prefer this, just because there is this more of an air of realism of, oh, we went out and we filmed these animals. Because if there was a similar, like, I don't know, uniting thread or whatever, I think it can add a sense of, well, I guess not even just unrealism, but just dramatization, right? Like, that's one thing I think of a lot of times when actual nature documentaries do something similar to this, is often when I'm watching them, it kind of takes me out, because I'm just like, sometimes I'm not even too sure if this is the same animal that you're saying is this one, as well as the fact that, like, you really expect me to believe that this animal went on, like, I don't know, all these adventures and, like, all these, and, like, maybe so, right? But, like, I don't know, it feels a little. And yeah, animals can go around and do lots of things, but, like, you got all the footage of them. Like, I don't know, if it feels a little staged and
you happen to find the one zebra with main character syndrome.
Yeah, exactly.
I definitely remember watching some documentaries like that as a kid occasionally, and even as a kid, I would pick up on, like, oh, this is being a little narrativized. This is being a little dramatized.
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't know how.
And if you prefer that, that's great. But I personally much prefer the Planet Earth style that this has, and because I know that. Yeah, I mean, I just really like it, and I hope that they keep it up. And even, like, with a little bit more meat to some of the narrative stuff, like, even what episodes 1 and 2 did, I think is fine. And I think is actually good, because, like you said, it, like, combines them better. It makes them feel a little more structured. I'm in full support of that. But,
I'm in full support of, like,
a full, like,
and oceans as well, with, like, picking back up on the ammonites.
Yeah.
Like, I think having a couple common threads or returning animals, I think is cool, as long as it's, you know, not done to, like, an unrealistic feeling degree or anything like that.
This isn't the Magungasaurus episode.
Yeah.
I mean, even in islands, I mean, I like that it's inferred that it's probably not the same individual, but the fact that the Hatzegopteryx is carrying the Tethys corpse or whatever, is a little bit of connective tissue that kind of brackets.
It is, and I think it works well here. So yeah, I don't want people to think I'm critiquing, like, when this season leans into that a little more, because I think leaning into it a little more is totally fine. Yeah. I think for me, the main appeal of this show, as opposed to something like Walking with Dinosaurs, I mean, there's multiple appeals, but the main thing that makes Prehistoric Planet cool to me, and, like, the main central just, like, reason it exists in my mind, is let's make people feel like they are watching real footage of real animals. Yeah. And let's make this feel as, like, grounded and planet earthy as possible.
Exactly.
And they do an amazing job with that. So I think that still remains appeal number one for me with this show. The main thing I like about it is the sense of immersion, and the sense of really good world building, because even though this is based on a real time in prehistory, they are still doing world building ultimately. They're creating their own version of it, and I think in terms of internal consistency and stuff like that, I think they do a good job of just fleshing that out.
I agree.
But anyhow, now that we've been talking for 17 days and 47 nights, Badlands.
Badlands. All right, so we kick off the episode with potentially, like, the coolest environment the show has to offer.
Oh my gosh.
With one of the coolest sauropod designs ever. and we see a herd of the Indian Statistical Institute walking through a volcanic badlands. Okay, if no one understands that joke, Issisaurus, its name is literally, what is it? It's not an anagram.
Acronym.
What do you call it? Acronym, thank you.
What? You messed it up and then I couldn't think of it. You like debrained my brain.
Yes. So Issisaurus doesn't translate to anything. The ISI before Saurus are just is an acronym for Indian Statistical Institute.
Yep.
Yes.
It's
a very
Statistical
interesting name
Institute
for a
for
dinosaur.
Yeah.
Yes. Shout out to the Skeleton Crew for first introducing me to that. This is just plugging the Skeleton Crew this whole time.
It's hard
but
not
go
to
watch them.
sometimes,
They're great.
honestly.
I'm gonna
They
pretend
have so
that
much
I'm
great-
more
great
familiar with
stuff.
them than I am, so I can fit in.
Yes. But anyway, the environment here is just stunning. I know one thing you commented on, Gibson, that I really appreciated more in my second watch through was just the sound design of basically the
Yes.
bubbling landscape with the haunting
Yes.
calls of the sauropods.
The way the calls have like that reverb on them just echoing through the environment. It was haunting. This scene is like one of the most unsettling, haunting scenes in the show. There's something almost like surrealist about just seeing these sauropods in that habitat, and it's so cool. It's one of my favorite, if not just my favorite looking sequence in the show. I avoided trailers, and so did Aiden, our friend Kikizilla. And when we all watched it together, like when they first dropped the shot of the isosaurs in front of the spewing lava in just the intro for episode 1, like we both freaked out because that was just
Remember
like,
you losing your mind.
yeah, like, that is a money shot. That is a absolute money shot.
Yeah, that was really, really cool.
Yep.
It was,
And it's
that
also
was a great
so
scene.
cool seeing such big sauropods in such a barren landscape, like even more barren than deserts. Like we're talking flowing lava and poisonous
Yeah, yeah.
gases
And
everywhere.
I really like
and the
them-
fact that they would
The boys rolling up in
Actually,
the nether be like,
highlighting a really unique landscape that I mean will clearly exist today because they filmed at a real location, probably like Iceland or Hawaii or something. But
I was assuming Hawaii.
as far as like the scale of it is something that doesn't exist today because this is part of the Deccan Traps, which was just a massive volcanic like this would have been country-sized lava fields. Like this was huge.
Yeah.
And is obviously a big factor. I know a lot of people have argued was a factor in the dinosaurs' ultimate extinction. Obviously, that's a little still up in the air and debated. But it was really cool to actually see them highlight that and point this out and be like, hey, look, this is here. There were animals that would have existed here in India because they didn't have anywhere else to go because India was an island. And they would live and even in this case take advantage of it with like the geothermal heating stuff. And I thought it was really cool at the end in the uncovered segment, like actually learning that this isn't just they didn't just completely make this up. Like this is kind of based on some fossils of sauropods using it for geothermal heat, which is really, really cool.
Yeah.
Because I could easily see this being like the type of thing that like the average viewer who's not as familiar with dinosaurs would be like, why would they do that?
Or familiar with how weird animals will do some weird stuff.
Yeah.
Speaking of
Because
which,
animals
I love
really
this.
will.
Yeah.
And speaking of which, I also love that the uncovered sections are slapped at the end of the episode now, just to kind of slap people in the face. For those kind of people who are like, hey, I don't believe this isn't real. And they're like, nah, here's the science.
Make it
Right
a lot
here.
easier to get to, right? Because I know that, like, I mean, just the fact that it's part of a separate thing that you have to click on, like, is just complex enough that I bet some people didn't do it.
Oh, yeah.
So having it on the
No, a
actual
lot of
episode, I
people
think, was a
definitely
good
missed
idea.
the uncovered sections last season, but hopefully this season, you know, they didn't because you can't avoid them.
Because that's
And
also
I don't know if you guys knew.
a critique of Prehistoric Planet in general that I do, that I acknowledge and like I'm not too sure exactly how I feel about it, right, is the fact that they will present information in it and it's not necessarily always clear when it's based on actual evidence versus just complete speculation or reasonable speculation or whatever. I don't know, I'm just mentioning that. I don't really know how I feel about it
You kind of
myself,
wish that each
but-
episode came with like a
And I don't know if
footnote.
you guys.
in the description that's like, you know, here's the scenes that are more speculative, here's the ones that are more grounded or something, because it would be nice to see more resources just on the behind the science type stuff.
And obviously, I haven't actually, I know that they've done a whole they have a podcast out now that I haven't listened to, but I'm assuming that covers a lot more of the behind the scenes stuff, because I do wish
probably
that they
does.
have, I do think a resource like that is very, very useful, and is a good idea for helping tell people, like, what they're basing some of their speculation on, or versus when it's something that, like, we actually, like, yeah, no, like, they did this.
Well, I'm not sure if you guys know, but on Apple TV, after the show aired, they are still posting extra uncovered segments. So there's one whole segment on ammonites, there's one on sauropods, one on ankylosaurs, one on Beelzebufo, and one on T-Rex.
Oh, I didn't realize
that. They're posting them to their YouTube as well, so they're, like, publicly available, even if you don't
they're on
have
YouTube as well.
I'll watch them on YouTube. I had no idea. That's
and
great.
they're still coming out. Like, I think the
amazing.
T-Rex one. Yeah, I think the T-Rex one, like, or the Beelzebufo one, literally just came out like yesterday or the day before. So they're still posting them.
Yeah, I saw them.
Cool.
Oh, that's awesome.
I had to, like, double take because I saw one on their YouTube channel. I was like, oh, an uncovered segment. I was like, wait, I didn't see that one. What's that from?
That same thing that happened to me. I was like, oh, they're posting the cover. Wait, ammonites?
They didn't talk about that. They talked about mosasaurs in that episode.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for telling me. I don't know how I missed those. Well, clearly I know why. YouTube just didn't suggest them to me because it's dumb. But
well, yes. YouTube should know how important this
moving
is
on.
to us.
What's next?
Moving on to one of the most layered scenes in the whole show, which starts off with showing off baby velociraptors. This is also one of my personal critiques. I want to start with here upon rewatch with this episode, is I feel like it feels like the little scene with the baby velociraptors was kind of shoehorned in before the rest of the sequence just to be like, oh, baby, which is fine. I'm not complaining that it's there. But it was really short, and the way they cut away from it was kind of like, it felt like it might have been more of its own sequence. It just feels a little separate compared to what actually happens later.
I can see that. I can see that. I felt a little... My critique for that part is that I wish that the Velociraptors had more interesting cinematography when they first appear in this episode, because I think about in deserts when we first see the Velociraptor and, like, the close-up of the foot coming down and the music cue of the and this season it kind of feels like they just appear, which I guess to an extent I understand, because they're probably thinking, like, we've already met them, we don't need the same amount of fanfare. But hey, some people might watch these episodes in random order, might watch season 2 first for some reason. I mean, you know, so I feel like each episode should stand on its own more, and I feel like Velociraptor just felt very underwhelming in its entrance in this episode. It does cool things in like a couple minutes, but just its initial appearance felt like there could have been a little more fanfare to it, I guess.
Yeah,
I agree. Well, seeing as how I think the Tarbosaurus's entrance is way more grand than season 1's, where they're all just laying around.
Tarbosaurus gets a really cool entrance, and I love their entrance last season. It felt very grounded and neat of them sleeping. I thought that was a cool way to do it. But this season, they come in with a presence to them.
Totally, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, we get a group of Nemectosaurs and what they call Mongolian Titans, because they're just based off of footprints we have over there.
Footprintosaurus.
And then Prenocephalae, which is debut of Pachycephalosaurs in this series, finally.
Yes, which was really nice to see.
Really nice to see these little alien dudes. I love their design. We'll see them more in detail later with the Tarchiacean.
They do look like they should be in a flying saucer.
They do.
Pachycephalosaurs are weird animals, man. I kind of, because there's not a lot of them, so I kind of forget about them. But whenever I see them, like when I saw these and then the later ones in swamps, I was just kept being like, man, like what even is this thing? Like, look at it.
No, I agree. I think both designs for both the Prenocephalae and the Pachycephalosaurus this season, both do a really good job of capturing how just off kilter these things were visually.
Yeah.
Yeah. But really cool, just showing mixed species sauropod herd and also just small animals tagging along for general safety.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
when they get corralled down into tight quarters, I love that the Tarbosaurus don't actually do anything. They just walk menacingly, and the sauropods just start tripping all over the place.
Yeah.
It felt like a very realistic, just passive, cause panic hunt. And just this environment of seeing these big sauropods tripping over each other and falling down in this tight canyon. Really, really cool stuff. And then the Velociraptors chasing the Prenocephaly along this steep canyon wall, and of course drop kicking it into oblivion.
Which is really cool.
This scene
really
had no
generating the
shortage of
sense that this
spectacle,
is-
and yet it was still grounded, and that's kind of what this show is good at.
Yeah.
I think this scene too, when the Velociraptor kicked the Prenocephaly off the cliff upon my second watch, I really appreciated its kind of clumsy and almost like idiotic look on its face afterwards. Because as someone who's owned birds before, but my birds will do something that, or they would do something that comes off as intelligent, but then immediately like have this look of, did I just do that kind of thing?
Yeah.
You know, whether with one of their
interpreted
toys or
it
whatever.
as almost an accident when we all first watched it. Like
it looks
had that
almost
vibe.
accidental. It does. And the way
Yeah.
he kicked him off and then just kind of like tilted his head like, oh. I was
Hey,
like,
look, it worked.
oh, it worked.
And I kind of hope it was on the accidental side, because this is one of the few points in Prehistoric Planet that, for me at least, felt a little like really, like it just drop kicked it off the, like, really, come on, like, I don't know, that level of like planning, I guess, for a Velociraptor to have just seems a bit unrealistic. So like, again, I like to think that this was like, that this wasn't necessarily supposed to happen, like it was just kind of trying to jump on it, but it just didn't go well, but it worked out for it in the end. Because
I definitely get that impression just by the way it kind of scuttles and jumps back and stuff.
Yeah. And it was just one of those, like, because I mean, often documentaries have stuff like this where it's just like a crazy blue moon, like, oh my god, did we just get that on camera, kind of a thing, right?
Yeah.
Just a really random event that isn't something that normally occurs.
Yeah, totally. But yeah, once again, it's just a really cool layered scene, and I love once again how reserved this show is with the carnivores hunting, especially 90% of the time. Where just their presence alone can cause this much chaos with these huge animals, and also the little ones taking brief advantage of the situation was really neat. But also the baby velociraptors are adorable. I didn't comment on that, but didn't really need to.
Yeah.
Want to
They're
anyway.
pretty great.
Oh, I think you needed to. I think that is an important public service announcement.
Yep.
Head big, eye big, foot small.
Next scene, we've got the Corythoraptors nesting, which isn't the most popular scene, but it's honestly one of my more favorites in this episode. Personally, I think seeing this vibrant design that we obviously saw in season 1 in the autumn forest is really cool. Seeing them in a very dry environment is really cool. Seeing the stereotypical, well, not stereotypical, but very commonly depicted oviraptor and nesting scenario brought to life in such a great piece of media, and just their animations and the models just in broad daylight are so tangible.
I was going to say, once again,
incredible.
The Corythoraptors
Corythoraptors
effects
are
are
great.
like some of the nicest looking ones in the series. And I love all the details in this scene, like them just panting in the heat, and the way they
Nice
cover
to
the
see
eggs with their arm
their
feathers.
sound
and
design
stuff.
is great.
The egg color thing as well was pretty good, with being based on the study of dinosaur egg color, with some being blue.
Oh,
was it
I
really?
forgot about that.
Yeah, I don't know if they found that
I
with
forgot about that too.
oviraptors specifically, but I just remember they found that with some dinosaur eggs they were blue. Which, I mean, is a very
interesting.
common bird thing. A lot of bird eggs are blue.
Yeah.
I forget what the reasons why. I don't know if it's 100% known why. I think there's some hypotheses as to why it is, because, like, blue is a very common color for eggs to be, maybe even more than white. It was very, very nice to see that in here.
Totally. I forgot about that. I read about that in an article a couple of years ago. I think Deinonychus eggs were one of the main
Okay,
things,
yeah,
right,
maybe.
that they studied. I could be wrong. Don't quote me on that. It's been a while, but that's ringing a bell. Anyway, we get a nice transition into nighttime, and we get a model reskin Velociraptor. Is it reskin or is it just the Velociraptor model? Did they change the colors at all?
I don't even know if it's
tell.
reskinned.
I think they did it really wisely by having it be at night, because it's really hard to tell if they changed anything or if it's the same thing, which is kind of like, I think was kind of a wise move on their part. Like, if you're going to reuse the same model, at least do it like this, where like it's really hard to tell.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think
my only critique for it is that it's the very next scene after we saw Velociraptor. Like, I kind of wish the Tarchia scene came first, just to break it up a little bit.
Yeah.
But the model reusage makes sense for Kurukula. I mean, obviously,
it's a very
similar animal.
It doesn't look very different from Velociraptor. Yeah.
It's close enough for the purposes of the show, I would say.
And I think it's really cool as well that, you know, they could have pulled a lazy and just shown Velociraptor again, but I think it's cool that they're bringing light to smaller animal descriptions and lesser known things that go around paleontologically.
Yeah, I mean, I'd never heard of it. This is one of the cases, kind of like with Corythraptor, where they showed an animal arm. It's like, oh, I've never heard of this thing before.
Yes.
Yeah, this show has genuinely introduced me to quite a number of new animals. I counted them up after watching the season, and I think I learned about a dozen from each season, which feels like a lot, because I feel like I know a lot to begin with.
Yeah,
I should do that myself and see how many I was introduced to. I remember one that hit me like a truck initially was a Kakaifalu.
Kakaifalu is a badass name. One of the best names.
It's so good. Anyway, we get... Actually, this is another good point as to why I'm totally in agreement with you, Gibson, now, as to why this scene shouldn't have followed up with the Velociraptors, is we have baby Kurukula as well, and we just have baby Velociraptor as well, so it really kind of feels like a bit...
reuse.
Yep. Regardless, they were cute. I loved them trying to break open the egg. It was cute. And then Tarkia scene, which has grown on me immensely upon my second rewatch. I think it's got a lot of personality to it. And they are so darn awkward, and I'm really happy we got a full scene dedicated to an ankylosaur.
Yeah. Ankylosaurs are very weirdly proportioned animals with just how wide they are.
Yep.
Yeah. No, the first time we watched this episode, because I'll spoil now that this is still probably my least favorite episode of the season, just because I think the Kuru and Tarchia scenes are still a little on the not too interesting side for me, so the episode kind of suffers pacing-wise in the middle for me when I watch it. Yeah. But it has grown on me, though, and this Tarchia scene specifically has grown on me, because it's not the most eventful scene, and maybe it could be a little shorter, but the second time around, I really was able to just like relax and just appreciate these models and their hilarious walk cycle and just their weird noses and breathing. They have a lot of personality to them, while still being a very just good reconstruction of the genus.
Yeah,
they're quite a delight.
They are. I was also really appreciating the concept of pairing up Prenocephalae with Tarchia, because they're both such weird animals in such different ways. And it was cool comically from mostly a visual perspective, with just their animation, their animated personalities and everything.
I loved how the Prenocephalae just pecks right at the Tarchia's freaking eyeball, like so aggressively.
They really made jerks. I love them.
They really made the Prenocephalae a pest. Which is fun. Feels very realistic, because sometimes herbivores are just very passive in documentaries, so it was nice to see them picking on each other aggressively.
Yep.
100%. I
one
really
of my
like
favorite
the way
shots
that
is
showed off their tails at the end, like
display.
I thought that was cool.
One of my favorite shots too is what I'm assuming is a practical
club
effect. Smacking the sand.
Yeah.
I thought that was neat.
Yeah, that looked good.
Yeah.
I like, too, that this is another scene that shows some real restraint, in that it puts emphasis on the club as a a warning and a threat display, as something to intimidate other animals, but they don't actually hit anything with it. Which, I wouldn't want every scene to be like that. It's nice to actually see animals use their weapons for things, but it's also nice to have some scenes to break it up where they just use them for display, and we keep it a little more low-key, because that is how things go down in nature a lot of times.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that.
There can often be a lot of posturing.
Mm-hmm.
Anywho,
Anywho.
Best scene of the episode time, anyone?
Yes. And like we alluded at earlier, a really brilliant usage of bookending the show. Bookending the show with narrative continuation. Really,
yes.
Which is just returning to when the eggs are hatching from the Isosaurus.
But that was a very good move.
It's such a treat that we get to spend most of this episode in this environment.
It really is. I have such a love for Cretaceous India now, and I didn't know anything about it before, and now I'm like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Same. Like, Ichthyosaurus and Rajasaurus have just gone to, like, near the top of my requested figures list. Like, BOTM.
Yeah, Rajasaurus has shot up a ton for me. Rajasaurus is cool.
I've always liked Rajasaurus, but I never liked it this much.
Yeah, 100%. Yep.
And I heard of Ichthyosaurus, but I also wasn't aware of how weirdly proportioned it was, similar to Atlasaurus. And I love Atlasaurus since I got the Eofauna figure. Yeah. So it's totally like up there for my sauropods now.
I will say, just for the educational purposes, extremely distantly related sauropods, similar through convergence, in case anyone is wondering. Because Atlasaurus is the Middle Jurassic. Not
I'm
a
assuming
titanosaur.
Ichthyosaurus is a titanosaur, because I think there's only titanosaurs in the late Cretaceous.
In the Maastrichtian, as far as I know.
I don't think any
Unless there was just a secret apatosaurine somewhere.
There might have very well been, and we just haven't found it.
Yeah, I mean, it could be.
But yeah, I thought this whole scene was great. And seeing the Rajasauruses eat the babies, again, like a very realistic thing. Because one thing that I often that I like to point out, and it's been one thing that I think Prehistoric Planet, like especially in season 1, I think did that. I at least, like with my feeling of how things probably were in the Cretaceous, thought was a little unrealistic, is a lot of dinosaurs are clearly, especially when it comes to like sauropods or whatever, are R selectors. So basically, for those who don't know, when it comes to reproductive styles of animals, there's two different extremes, and you can obviously like fall in the middle. It's kind of a spectrum between R and K selectors. So K selectors are like mammals and birds, where we don't have that many offspring. And to put in context, that many can still mean like 5. 5 is not a lot of offspring to have in one group, compared to what the other ones do.
Compared to reptiles.
So you have less offspring, but you put more effort into the offspring to like help them survive better, right? So because of that, each individual baby has a pretty decent chance of making it to adulthood, or at least a much better chance than R selectors, which have a very different strategy, which is they don't put much parental care into their babies, but they have just a ton of babies, and their goal is just by sheer chance some of them will survive. And this is obviously what most reptiles do. Most frogs do it, not all frogs. Most insects do it. Just have a ton of babies. And it's something that many dinosaurs did, and we know they did because we find nests with lots and lots of eggs in them. And if you find nests with lots and lots of eggs, that probably means limited parental care, or at the very least a system where babies died a lot, right? So like one thing that I know some people have talked about a lot with Prehistoric Planet is how there's a lot of baby murder. But like that's very realistic, I think, because these animals were having lots and lots of babies, which means that there was a lot of death happening between them, right? Not a lot of them made it to adulthood. probably.
And I mean,
like,
this happens today with sea turtles on the beach.
Yeah,
like seagulls, crabs, anything will go after them.
100%. Like, if it's a stable population, right, then each individual should end up having about 2 offspring that make it to reproduce, right? And like, in a sea turtle or whatever, an individual sea turtle can lay thousands and thousands of eggs over the course of its life, and probably you can count the number of those that actually make it to reproduce themselves on one hand. That's crazy. A lot of them die, and lots of dinosaurs would have done similar, and especially sauropods, because we find sauropod nests that have tons and tons of eggs.
Yes.
So they would have had a very similar strategy of just lay a ton of eggs and hope that some of them survive. So seeing the babies get picked off a lot is a very grounded and realistic thing to happen.
Totally.
And it probably happened a lot
how,
in the Mesozoic.
Yeah. I loved how undramatic it was presented. Upon my rewatch, I noticed, because the Rajasaurus are really just kind of walking and scooping things up.
Yeah.
There's nothing super tragic about it or anything. It's just these things, they're just scooping them up and swallowing them, and that's it.
Just because I got sidetracked there for a second, just to kind of get back to my original point of lots of babies, and some of the accuracy things. One thing that I have thought about with Prehistoric Planet in general, when it comes to a lot of their dinosaurs, is I think they show too many adults. Because they have they depict them a lot more like mammals again, where mammals have a couple babies that grow up relatively fast. But like, we also know from a lot of dinosaur histology that especially the big ones like Triceratops or T-Rex, they would have taken a while to reach adulthood. And so probably in a lot of certainly larger species, most of the individuals of a species at any given point would have been juveniles. And so obviously, like, probably the adults were hanging out together and stuff, with other adults, but I think seeing more young herds, right? Like groups of young Triceratops, groups of young Edmontosaurus is, I think, something I'd want to see more, because I think that's probably more how it would be, and would probably actually be more common in the ecosystem than herds of adults, if that makes any sense. Just because they would have so many babies, and a lot of them would die. Some of them would get pretty decent age probably, and then would die, that kind of a thing. But yeah, most of the individuals of a lot of species, I strongly suspect were not full grown adults.
You got
my main thing I want to comment on for the Rajasaurus scene is just that the animators killed it.
Yeah.
Specifically in terms
so
of, I could have never imagined before this show seeing a big theropod like this being so nimble, literally like hopping over rocks and stuff in a way that looks so believable. I feel like this scene is
almost 40 feet long.
Oh yeah, Rajasaurus was huge.
I was thinking like low 30s.
Yeah, Rajasaurus was a big.
Wow.
I think it's one of the biggest Abelisaurs, if not the biggest. It's a big.
I think
boy.
it is just the biggest, at least the biggest one that's not like just absurdly fragmentary.
Yeah.
From what I understand, I could be wrong, but yeah, I think the effects team. This is one of the crowning jewels of the show for me. Is just the Rajasaurus in general.
Yeah.
It's just them bounding over the rocks and stuff, and I also just. Not much needs to be said about this, but I also just want to say one of the best designs in the show, in my opinion. I think it's a perfect balance of natural.
It's a beauty.
It feels like they camouflage into their environment, but they have a really beautiful vibrance to the reds and oranges on them that I love. They look like they're meant to blend in with a lava flow, which I think is really cool.
Yeah.
Yes. That feeling when the giant Indian Abelisaur pulls out the lava camouflage.
Yes. But yeah, I mean that's Badlands. I'm still spoiler alert, I'm still struggling to rank the episodes in this season.
I definitely
genuinely can't.
I definitely need to watch them again in order to do it. I know what my favorite is, I know what my least favorite is, but after that, I don't know.
Okay. I still don't really
I
know
what my favorite is, but
is.
I don't know what my least favorite is.
Okay.
It's tough for me.
I'm the opposite of David. I know my least favorite is still Badlands, even though I really like it, and I think the deckhand stuff bookending it is excellent, so it still has a lot going for it. And I really like what they did with it. I'm still struggling with what my favorite is. I mean, I know the 2 or 3 that I'm juggling, but yeah, it's tricky. This season is very consistent, honestly. I mean, last season was too, but
they did some really cool stuff, some really good stuff.
They did indeed. Well, unless we had any other thoughts to shoehorn in on these episodes, I'm thinking fizzling out this part 1, and
I think that works.
Yeah. I think that's a good move.
All right. I'm glad I decided to do this earlier because we've almost been going for an hour and 15 minutes. All right. Well, thank you all for watching, and if you made it this far,
part 2.
Yes,
we'll see you for swamps and oceans and North America.
North America.
What should the code word be? I typically do like a code word at the end for people to comment if they made it this far.
Simosuchus Chad Jawline.
Simosuchus Chad Jawline.
Comment Simosuchus Chad Jawline in all caps down below if you made it this far.
Yes.
And we'll catch you for part 2 where we'll get into, spoiler alert, my favorite episode, Swamps, right off the
bat. It's my favorite too. Spoilers.
Let's go. All right. Goodbye, everybody.
See you, boy.
Boy.